was clean.
Hit high and right. Target's shaking quite a bit. I missed him on the shake. Hey guys, welcome back to Triple F Shooting. Today we are going to be looking at a Savage 99. This is a pretty special rifle. It has a lot of really interesting history, so we're going to try to just jump right into it. The first thing I want to talk about with you here on the tabletop is just the basic features of the gun. That'll allude into the history quite a bit, but this also kind of tells you why I like this rifle. So if we go all the way up, we're just going to start at the muzzle and work our way back. We have a 24-inch barrel on this rifle. It was sold in tons of different varieties, so you can go anywhere from longer to shorter with quite a variation there. The front sight is a typical blade, but it does have a brass bead on it to give you a little bit more pickup when you have good lighting. As we work our way down to the fore end, you have a schnabel, or however you want to say that, shape to it. You'll be able to see that better when we get out and do the shooting videos, but basically the thing is very thin, tapers up into kind of a knob that if you were to rest your hand against it, it stops your hand there. That helps create a very lightweight front end. This rifle's super handy when you're out in the woods. Most people, this would be a great hog rifle. It's a great deer rifle. It's very quick handling. That light fore end doesn't really give you the best extreme range precision or anything like that, but for the average person hunting, especially here in Missouri where you don't have a ton of super long range shots, this is an excellent rifle for that, and that thin fore end helps with it. You also have some really cool hand checkering. Back then, I think all of it was done by hand, and you can tell that because there's quite a bit of imperfections in it. If you noticed in the very first kind of flow through of the rifle in the video, you can stop and pause, but you'll see little imperfections where someone obviously wasn't a machine. The rear sight's very basic. It is drift adjustable for windage. The front sight is too, I forgot to mention that, but you have a very small ladder formation, not like on military rifles where you're setting the thing up for 1,800 yard shots. You just have a couple of different settings where you can lift this under spring tension and slide back and forth. We get into the scope mounts. Now, the guns were offered originally tapped and drilled drilled and tapped for scope. This is not something that would have been around then. My particular rifle was built in the, I believe, exactly 1950 by the serial number. This scope is probably a 70s Weaver. It's still pretty cool. It's very vintage. It has a panoramic view on it, so more of a rectangular input side. But you'll notice that I have see-through mounts on this particular rifle. Again, when we get out and start shooting, I'll give you a better idea of kind of the advantages and disadvantages of that. The receiver is pretty interesting on this rifle. It's very smooth and rounded toward the bottom. Almost every rifle I have ever seen, obviously since they're not made anymore and a lot of these are older, are worn right along the bottom of the receiver here. And that is because this is the exact balance point of the gun, especially when you don't have a scope on it. This thing is extremely comfortable to hold just like that walking through the woods, and it carries very well. So most of the receivers are worn on the bottom, if not both sides too. This has, interesting enough, a rotary magazine mechanism. So essentially, imagine looking sort of at a revolver where you have fingers holding individual rounds and spiraling through. It's definitely revolutionary for the time. Again, don't want to kill all the history right off the bat, so we'll keep moving along. This gun also features a brass round counter. So there is a window on the other side of this receiver. We'll cut away here in just a second to show you a better idea of it, but There's a window on this gun that as you load the rotary magazine, you can see how many rounds are available to you, which, considering the original design for this rifle was 1892, that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and look at that video. Now, one really cool thing that we didn't get a close-up look when we were here on the ground is the round counter. So I'm going to bring you in tight, give you a peek so you can tell we have no ammo in the gun. So if you just hang out right there, I'm going to make sure my safety's off, open the gun. I'm going to put in 3 rounds into my rotary mag. Now I am going to close the gun. Gun's not going to be pointed at anyone or anything that it shouldn't be. Safety is back on. Now I'm going to flip the gun back around and you should see a 2. So that's pretty neat. It tells me I have 1 round in the chamber, and you can see there I have my firing pin indicator sticking up right behind my scope mount telling me I'm live, and then 2 rounds in my magazine. So that is very cool. Alright, so as you saw in that video, you also have a firing pin indicator. When the firing pin is actuated or ready to be fired, you get a nub. Now again, I have a scope mount almost in the way, but it pops up just behind the scope mount so that even if conditions were less than ideal or you couldn't see very well, you can rub and tell that my trigger is basically ready to drop on a round or lack thereof. But also, another feature that, considering this rifle came from the 1890s, is pretty ahead of its time, which is probably something you'll hear just time and time again when people talk about this particular rifle and its variants. Moving on, we have a very kind of elongated section of the back of the receiver here that makes it look quite a bit different than other rifles. That's because our firing pin or our hammer and all that mechanism is internal, meaning there's really nothing that can get in the way of it. If you have basically any Winchester that you can think of immediately to mind, you have an external hammer. If something gets into that or in the way of it, when you're going to fire, you're going to create problems, or just basically your round isn't going to go off. Every once in a while you'll get that dreaded click and no bang, and whatever you're hunting might hear it. That's a problem. So this rifle does away with that. You cannot possibly get things, or at least it's a lot less likely to get things in between the hammer and your round. Now the lever shape on this particular rifle is curved to follow the pistol grip. The original rifles were pretty much just straight stock. This is something that came out later. Again, this rifle's built in the 50s. I think the curved stocks started coming out in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 20s. But you got a nice curve that follows along. The the lever is case hardened, and some of that is still existent on this rifle. One of the really odd things about this gun, though, that is different from most, you do have a safety. The safety acts like a lever lock and is this little tab here. I'll get a close-up picture for you, but to be in safe, it is pushed forward, physically locking the bolt. To get the safety off, you actually have to, so if I was basically ready to shoot, I would have to reach back beyond the trigger and pull that to the rear. It's not terrible. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. You shouldn't be trying to shoot in the dark anyway when you can't, tell what you're doing. But to me, it's just kind of a extra cautious reaching back because for some reason I feel like I could get a hold of the trigger. Probably just my lack of experience with this rifle, but that's not terribly common, at least in my experience. Moving on back down the stock, again, we have more hand checkering on the pistol grip and a nice little cap to it. Again, that checkering is all done by human hand, so you have some imperfections there. The wood on this gun, they offered fancy walnut. This, I don't believe, is the fancy walnut, but it's just kind of a showing of back in the 50s and basically all the way up in the 90s, best I can tell, the wood on guns was a whole lot better looking. So this walnut is really pretty. There aren't any major imperfections in it. No huge dents or dings, which is one of the reasons that I really like this particular rifle. Some of these things come in just basically destroyed. One common thing to note really quick while we're talking about the stock and receiver is along this tang, you have a tang that comes back here, holding the stock on, and along that line is typically where you're going to see cracking. A lot of them are just hairline, some are worse than others. You also catch some chipping around here if you are looking to purchase one and don't see pictures of that, or the person doesn't allow you to look at that, probably cracked. So keep that in mind. The last thing we're going to talk about on the rifle is the buttstock or the plate. It is actually steel plate. Now this round does not kick a whole lot, so this isn't terrible, but this steel plate is definitely not a cushion. You also have a little bit of scoring or stippling, if you will, to help keep it stuck on your shoulder, because a smooth steel plate tends to get pretty slick. So now that we've got that stuff out of the way, let's get out and shoot this thing a little bit. We're not going to shoot it a ton because these bad boys cost somewhere around $2.50, $3 a pop. So not looking to throw a whole lot of them, but we'll do a quick demo to show you how smooth the action of this rifle is and how quick you can be with it. All right, guys, we've gotten a little bit closer. I'm going to shoot, I think, 3 more rounds and just kind of, again, showcase how smooth the lever is on this thing. One definite disadvantage to the see-through mounts. So when I'm very close, I can drop down below, get a good cheek weld, and use my iron sights. But if I want to use my scope for anything like this, I'm basically regulated to a chin weld. Where you can see I'm not getting my whole cheek on the gun. I'm very high, which is fine. It's just different. So I'm going to go ahead, see if I can put these 3 rounds on target and ring some steel. We're spinning like crazy. That worked out pretty good. Let's go have a look. So as you can see, the rifle runs pretty well. It's quick handling. Again, it's fairly lightweight. The lever is really smooth. One thing to note, this lever cocks on close, similar to like an infield bolt rifle. So that last little bit, you might be able to see it in the video, but that last little bit of bringing the lever home is where a little bit of extra force is required to set your firing pin or set your hammer. On the other end, that does mean that the lever flies open, almost assisting you in getting that round out. So I've actually never had a problem with ejection on this thing, but I have come, at least in the first few times shooting it a long time ago, realized that closing the lever takes a little bit more force or thought than you might think until you get used to shooting the thing. But you can also see that the round is pretty potent. So we'll get some close-ups, but this bullet looks very similar to a 308. With talking about the round, I don't want to jump ahead on any of the history, so we will bump into that right now. The original design that led to this thing came around in 1892 during military trials, of all things. Arthur Savage, the guy who came up with Savage Arms, was basically trying to get his rifle sold to the U.S. military, and it was directly competing with, some of you may know this, is the 3040 Krag that the U.S. military picked up at that time. One interesting thing to note is the Krag won out, but didn't have one of the things that the Savage did, was the round count. That was something that the U.S. military actually asked for in their weapon trials, and ended up picking something that didn't have it at all, which, go figure. Trying to drop stuff. So, the original chambering for that 1892 rifle was also 3040 Krag, which I have right here, you can see is a round nose bullet. When that didn't work out, Arthur Savage basically turned this into a civilian rifle and came up with later the 1895. The 1895 was chambered in 303 Savage. Again, looked very similar to this. You have a round nose bullet, but still featured that rotary magazine so that you could load without the need for a long magazine tube underneath. As time went on, the 1895 was fairly successful, came out in lots of other chamberings, and led into the model 1899, which is sort of the parent rifle to this. Savage history is sort of difficult to keep up with because there's so many tiny variations, which makes this book an absolute gold mine if this is something you're interested in. This is basically a collection guide to Savage rifles. I'll throw a picture of the cover in there, but it was written by David Royal, who essentially went around to a bunch of different collectors and just gleaned as much information as possible. There's tons of really cool pictures in there. Absolutely awesome resource. Definitely not going to get that deep into it. It would take quite a bit. So we're going to give you the overview. So once the 1899 evolved and came into this form, again, straight stocks, new cartridges started coming out. The 300 Savage did not come out until 1920. There were quite a few others before that, one of which that's of note is the 250 3000, which was touted as one of the first rounds to break 3,000 feet per second and was sold as a big game rifle of all things. Lots of neat pictures, again, of guys taking ridiculous animals with that, fairly small charge. The 300 Savage actually comes from, make sure I got my rounds right, the 30-06, if you can believe that. So we'll get them up here close. I'll take some more pictures, but quite a bit of difference in those round sizes. At the time, in I believe it was 1920, just after World War I, the 300 Savage was supposed to replace, or at least get as close to these ballistic characteristics as possible in a much shorter round to fit this short throw receiver. And it actually did at that time. It was just a few hundred, well, maybe about 100 feet per second slower, but in a much smaller round. And you may notice that we are using pointy bullets in a lever action. That is really cool, and that is also because of that rotary magazine. So where other rifles of the time could not do such a thing, they're all stuck with using round noses so you don't get a giant chain fire explosion in your tube, the Savage gets to use ballistically superior rounds. So pretty cool. It is of note that Winchester had an 1895 rifle that could also use pointy bullets, but not quite as successful for them as all their other stuff. Now, this 300 Savage round is a 150 grain projectile traveling somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,700 feet per second. So excellent for whitetail. People take elk and caribou and all sorts of things with this. And up until the 308 cartridge came out, which the 300 Savage is the parent of, this rifle was kind of the thing, or at least the caliber. Lots of other guns were chambered in it, from Remington, obviously Savage. You got quite a few different places it's coming from. Sorry, I was laughing at my gorgeous wife. But now she's laughing and you'll probably hear it. But anyway, reset. So the 30-06, in order to get our 300 Savage out of it, they basically shortened the case quite a bit, made the neck quite a bit more severe, and the bend of the cartridge quite a bit more severe, and the neck quite a bit shorter to get as much pressure as they could out of that round. And it worked pretty well. Worked so well, in fact, that they came up with a 308 based on it, and the 308 round killed this. They do actually have this rifle in 308 if you're looking for it. It's a more modern version. It's not quite as pretty, if you want my opinion. Has kind of a squared off forend, but they were doing that all the way back into the 30s, so it wasn't all just pretty skinny forends for you the whole time. But you can get this thing throughout its lineage in just tons of different calibers, even including 410 shotgun, which is kind of neat. Marlin and Henry, I think, also offer 410 shotgun lever actions. I've never messed with one. Don't know why you would, but hey. Today, the ammunition is pretty difficult to find. We talked earlier about it being in about $2.50 to $3 a pop for that. So you're talking somewhere on the order of $50 to $60 for a box of ammo. That is ridiculous. So not shooting this thing a whole ton, but it makes an excellent deer gun. You break it out of the safe each year, shoot a couple rounds, make sure we're still good, and head into the woods. So The original chambering of that 303 Savage, as far as I know, you cannot buy it today. You can hand load for it. I've seen some kind of boutique ammo shops making it, but as far as I know, it's kind of out the window. And you can actually still buy those rifles, mostly just collector pieces, but they exist. So before we get finished up here, one of the F's in triple F stands for family. I'll let you figure out maybe on your own what the other F's stand for and have a little fun with that. But this rifle is kind of special in my family. My grandfather, who I never got to meet, but by all accounts was extremely intelligent and could fix just about anything he could touch, this was his choice of deer rifle. Uh, when he passed, that rifle went on to my father and started sort of a sickness, if you will, where he pretty much collects these in the 300 Savage and in the 250 3000 caliber. Um, I took my first decent sized buck. I've never killed a huge buck, but my first decent sized buck was with his 300 Savage. I got this rifle last year and took my first deer with my own Savage rifle. So that's kind of a neat thing to do. So this all sort of means a little bit more as far as my family is concerned to have something like this here on the table. But with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.